Hello, hello. This is feedback for the 13th documentary for English 102, Section 15011. I really enjoyed this discussion. You know, this is the part of the quarter where a lot of perspectives start to shift a little bit, that students start to struggle, especially right after working on the Colin Kaepernick article, right? Because the Colin Kaepernick situation was such a divisive situation for Americans. And so right on the heels of that, we discussed the 13th documentary, and I can see many of you either shifting your perspectives or still debating your perspective on our legal systems, our justice system, and our prison systems here in America. And I appreciate all of you being vulnerable enough and open enough to go through that process together here, because it's not always easy, right? And some of our perspectives may end up becoming debates. But that's what we're here for. We're here to learn and grow and progress, and hopefully for the better of our community and the communities around us. Keely, you were talking about some of the punishment and the legalities, and we can't ignore the connection of the 13th Amendment and criminal punishment. I know you were mentioning that the Constitution itself, the 13th Amendment itself, is not necessarily racist, but I think when you have an amendment that specifically ended a racist act in America, but while doing so legalized that foundationally racist act, you can't ignore that connection, right? And it should put you in a position to ask yourself the question, why is slavery legal at all, right? When we think about human trafficking, right, we think about, they are innocent people, right? So that slavery is wrong, right? But because of the way we frame criminals in America, we believe that criminals being enslaved in some way isn't wrong, and I think that's untrue. It takes away the humanity of criminals. And a lot of the arguments in this space are always about murderers, right, or rapists. And I do agree that those areas of criminality are the deep and darkest, and they often, to some degree, deserve harsh punishments. I don't disagree with that. But there are so many criminals in the justice system, in the prison system, that are victimless to some degree. Like, they didn't specifically harm anyone physically. And even so, it's also the way we view crime in America. For many of you, crime is such a distant idea or thought that you look down upon it and you shun people or punish people for their criminal behavior. But what I think a lot of people don't understand, and something that I was able to understand and experience by having family that work in the criminal system, in the justice system, in the prison system, having interactions with juvenile delinquents and reformed prisoners, what you don't understand is that crime is often a situation of lack of choices, right? A lot of the argument against criminals, they made the choice to commit that crime, right? And that operates under the assumption that they had a choice. A lot of people talk about the hood or ghettos, and a ghetto by definition is typically a very small enclosed space, typically overpopulated, right? And when you have an overpopulated area, but it's a small area, you're going to have limited resources. And so when you have limited resources, right, there is a fight for those resources, right? Because our human instinct is to survive. And if you think you're not someone that would be willing to commit a crime when you are backed against the wall without resources, I think you are selling yourself a bit too high, on the moral compass. I always frame this with my students in this way. If we were in a classroom and I locked you all in a classroom and I didn't tell you when you were getting out, and there was no way for you to get out, there was no one for you to call, right? You're all locked in this classroom. And I put one jug of water, a gallon of water, and a loaf of bread in the middle of the room, right? How long do you think it would take for you all to be fighting over the water and resources? Do you think that all of you would have the same idea of like, hey, let's share this water, let's preserve this water, everybody gets this? You would ration it out? I mean, it's noble to view people in that way, but we are animals at nature, and we intend to survive. And so when you put people in a tight, enclosed space with limited to no resources and an overpopulation, they're going to fight for those resources. And that's what we do as people. As Americans, we fight for resources. Historically, we have fought for resources. We fight over land. We destroy over land. Right? So I don't want you to disconnect that connection here. The 13th Amendment and slavery and the treatment of people of color in this country are deeply rooted and connected. And I think it goes well into what Alexis talked about. Alexis was mentioning convict leasing in 1898, right? This is nearly 30 years after the Emancipation Proclamation has been signed, and 73% of the state's revenue is from convict leasing or prisoner slave labor, right? That's an obscene amount of revenue, right? That's the majority of the state's revenue is from prisoners, right? Only 30 years removed from slavery. And they did that for the next 84 years. And it's concerning because, for many of you, you have experienced a history that has been watered down to highlights, right? The highlights. And I understand that. I've talked about this before in this class that, if you're going to write your own history, you don't want to tell all your deepest, darkest secrets and your biggest mistakes, right? You're going to give you the highlights and praise yourself a little bit, maybe talk about your struggles a bit. But for the most part, you don't want to share with the world what you've done wrong, the dark side. And so to some degree, I understand that. But we have a greater responsibility to our society moving forward to be able to grow from our mistakes. I'm reminded of students bringing up how Germany has handled the Holocaust, right? Not only creating a space to express their deep found shame for it, right? And a museum dedicated to those that they destroyed, but also understanding that, hey, the only way through this is to own it, apologize for it, and atone for it. And that's something that we have yet to do here in America. We have yet to do that for Native Americans. We have yet to do that for Japanese. We have yet to do that for African Americans. We have yet to do that for Latino Americans, Chicanos. And it's concerning. And I think, crime and criminality is something that the average American is so far, so distanced from, that they have no real understanding of how it functions in this world. But yet we have so many opinions about it. And that's concerning. But that's also how the media wishes for people to be. The media doesn't want you to be informed. An informed society is a dangerous society in the eyes of politicians, right? Brooke asked a great question. Shouldn't presidents address this issue? Yes, Brooke, absolutely they should. But we don't care about our criminal population. We don't care about rehabilitation. We don't care about reform. We don't care about getting criminals back into our society as contributing members to our society. We don't care about that. We relatively throw them in prison and lock the door, throw away the key, and forget about them. Hannah talked a little bit about how we're the prisons are so overpopulated and underfunded that we're trying to find alternative forms of imprisonment, and now we're going to controlling them with GPS trackers, right? Which screams Big Brother. And even for those of you that identify as a bit more conservative in your political views and stances, right? Big Brother is always a big concern for the conservatives, right? Conservatives don't want to be watched. They want their freedoms, right? Their freedom of speech, their freedom of assembly, their freedom, their right to bear arms, their freedom of religion. They want all of those things, right? But Big Brother will threaten that. If we're monitoring criminals, what's next? Monitoring children, monitoring neighborhoods, right? If we're monitoring the GPS, if we're having GPSs on prisoners and we're monitoring their movements within their homes, the next step would be to monitor their movements in that community, right? Well, how do we monitor the movements in the community, right? We may be able to monitor other people in that process. But I think that's something that goes, I guess, ignored. Summer, I appreciate your empathy. I think your reflection and your posts show great empathy and understanding for the humanity that exists in criminals, right? When I was younger, I spent time with juvenile delinquents and listening to their stories, and a lot of them were just products of their circumstance, of what they were born into, and they eventually became criminals because of their circumstances. I think for those that have privilege, it's easy for us to believe that life is easier, or not easy. It's easier to not commit crimes than it is to commit crimes. This is a choice, and it's like that's having choices is a privilege. I think a lot of people don't understand that until they meet people and really get to know people that don't have choices. Stephanie, you talked about Angela Davis and you having no idea about things, and just, understanding like how no one really cares about this history, or a lot of people don't know about this history, right? And that you had no idea this history, and that's by design, but it's also because most people don't care. Most people don't care to know the history. The majority of people want to be told what to think. I don't think many people will admit that. But if you get all of your ideas, views, and perspectives from your family, from what you see in the news or social media, then you have to question whether you want to be told what to think or not, right? Because to educate yourself is a process. It's a lot of hard work. It's a freedom that is rarely exercised. But I think it's a freedom that should be argued more than worrying about the right to bear arms. Because what I think we all miss about our society, about American society, is the true movers and shakers of this world, the true oppressors of this world, don't have guns. They have pens, and they write legislation, right? And Taylor, thank you. You were dropping knowledge and gems, all right? For those of you that didn't read Taylor's post, I encourage you to do so, right? Our greatest oppressors have pens, not guns. Cops are foot soldiers of policy and law, okay? They are nothing more than that. They are foot soldiers of policy and law. They are exercising and enforcing laws in the ways that they were designed. Do some abuse that power that they have? Yes, of course. We saw that recently with Tyree Nichols, which is a great opportunity to say that the argument about policing in this country is not inherently a race issue, right? As Taylor mentioned, it's not about us versus them. It's about creating a better community for ourselves, right? And it's about putting in place the right people necessary to enforce the laws in a way that doesn't strip people of their humanity, right? Of their rights in this country. But I digress from that conversation. Tiffany, I wanted to end here because Tiffany, I appreciate that you admitted that prior to this class, you were ignorant of a lot of things, right? That you just didn't know. And I appreciate that because there are so many people that come into my classes, that come into these spaces to learn, and they refuse to admit that they're ignorant. They're, and ignorant tends to have a negative connotation, right? That it's kind of almost like someone is attacking you, but it's not. Ignorant literally means that you don't know. What is truly troubling is when people don't want to know or refuse to know. And that's what's most concerning. And Tiffany, I want to say I appreciate that you had not only admitted, but that you started to understand more through this process. And I would, to answer your question, it is about money and power, right? It becomes less about race as you get deeper into this, although race is a byproduct of it, because there are so many people of color in lower income areas and communities, but it is about money and power. I mean, listen, when Alabama was having 73% of their revenue coming from convict leasing, I think it's evident that it's about money and power. But race is a byproduct of that. Just like Lee Atwater said in the documentary, right? You're talking about these abstract things, right? And it gets kind of bogged down in all of the language. But in reality, the byproduct is that black people get it worse than whites. Minorities in general get it worse than whites. And this is not an attack on white people. And white people, I hope you don't feel like I'm attacking you. It's not an attack. It's just an illustration of a history and a perspective that many of you have not been exposed to because you don't have to, right? It's not in schools. Maybe your families don't talk about it, right? I mean, why? It doesn't apply to you, right? But it does apply to the community you live in because a lot of you have people of color in your communities. And if you genuinely care about America as a whole and not just white America or wealthy America, which are two different things, let me tell you, then, maybe you should think about understanding America as a whole and not just one part of it. Anyway, this was a great conversation. As you see, I'm pretty amped up and excited about the conversation. I appreciate it. This one is a little bit longer than normal, but for all of you that are continued listeners, thank you for your time. Thank you for your work and effort. And I can't wait to talk next week. If you have any questions, comments, and concerns, email me. But otherwise, have a great week. And I look forward to talking with you all soon.